Hello and welcome back to The Scriptures Are Real. I'm your co-host today, Lamar, and this is my co-host, Kerry and Lamar.
Hey, Lamar, good to be with you.
Great to be back with you. I'm so glad you let me come along on this journey. When you talked about doing this last year, I was like, oh, it sounds great.
It's good, clean fun.
What do I do? What do I do? But we have a great time and we have so much fun. And I have been listening to your last couple of podcasts, and it's a great setup for what we're going to do today. And this is my plug for anybody who's listening or who is watching this, that go back and listen to some of these other ones. These are really good episodes. I was listening to your, I think, a short cast on the priests of, now do you say it Baal or Baal? I can't remember.
I say Baal.
Baal. Okay, some people say Baal.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, the problem is that there's no right English version, so choose your English version, right? In Hebrew, it would be Baal.
Baal, right? Because it has an apostrophe there, so it's Baal, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I thought too. But other people say, no, it's Baal.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, they can say whatever they want.
Okay, good. All right. Well, you know Hebrew and I don't, so good. There you go. Okay. I was listening to your podcast on that, and I was the couple things that I took away from that were so good was they're talking about you said about the Northern Kingdom. He said, don't look at the Northern Kingdom and that split as, is this like us? It's how are we like this? Because we're guaranteed we're going down that path. We are on that path. So anyway, I just love that. It was a great thing. And then when you had on Kim Matheson, that's one of my favorite stories about Elijah in the still small voice. He sees the whirlwind. That's such a great story. And I gave a talk in church just recently about that. And I love that. So anyway, I know I'm blasting right into this, but I had to get to that if you haven't got to this episode, or when you get to this episode, if you haven't got to those first, I recommend you check those out, because that's going to set up who Elijah is and what we're talking about here, and as the transition to Elisha. And it was really great ones. I just had a great time listening to those podcasts.
They're fun.
Yeah, that was really good. Kim has some great stories about learning revelation, and I really liked what she said. I was like, oh, that's so true. Sometimes it's not about what's being said, but how we understand, how we learn the language of God. How do we learn to listen to revelation, which is what we've been talking about here. Is, yes, we're interested in the stories, but it's not so much exactly what's in the stories for you. It's how does God speak to you in these episodes, and it's the language of God that you understand as you get to understand for yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's such an important thing that sometimes we forget how key it is that God speaks to us in a way that both will work for us and that will stretch us. And sometimes that's tough for us, and we'll see that in what we covered today. Is tough for us as we look at how God spoke with people from different time and culture, and what they were expecting and how he stretched them is so different than what we are used to, that sometimes it kind of freaks us out a little bit, but we'll look at that today.
Yeah, which was interesting. That's what Elijah went through with the still small voice. He was like, he has been in the fire. He has been in the whirlwind. He's been in the...
he just had all of that.
Yeah, that happens. But really, the key is, what's the peaceful time to you? So anyway, he's being taught how to listen to the Spirit. And that is such a great lesson for us. And I thought Kim did a great job of bringing that out. Like, sometimes it's the quiet parts, the no's or the you're not ready yet that you mentioned, that makes the answer more impactful when it comes, or maybe that you're asking the wrong question. Anyway, it was great information on revelation and what to do with it, how to understand. So that gets us into today. So we're coming to the end of Elijah's ministry on this, and I wanted to point this out here. Let's go to 1 Kings 19, and that's the still small voice. We're going to go ahead.
Well, yeah, but it's right at the end of 1 Kings 19 is when we get Elisha.
Right. Oh, that's what I want to mention. So I have to think of this podcast like I would if I was teaching a seminary class, because I can't tell you how many times I've lost somebody, or even myself as my own seminary student when I was a kid, or when I was younger anyway, that I'm like, wait, we were just talking about Elijah. Now it's Elisha. Is this just a different spelling? Is it the same person? Is it someone, because sometimes people have different names, right? Like Jacob, then Israel, or whatever. So I'm like, so I'm sure that our audience is much smarter than I was back then, but just for the sake of breaking this down, let's go through where we first hear about Elisha, and that is right here in 1 Kings 19 through 21. It says, so then he departed, he being Elijah. So Elijah departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat. Is that right? Shaphat, yeah. Who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him. So here's where we first hear about him. He just kind of, it's not a big introduction. He doesn't tell much about it. He's like, oh, he found this guy, and this young man ends up following him around. So tell us a little bit about, what do we know about Elisha at this point?
We know pretty much nothing, right? So, I mean, God in verse 16 had told him to anoint him to be a prophet in his own room, which is a way of saying to be your successor. And then everything else we learn right here. I mean, he's got 12 yoke of oxen, which suggests some wealth, although who knows, 12 is a symbolic number. So it may be literal, and often it's literal and also symbolic. So it may be literally he's that wealthy that he's got, and it doesn't seem like it's not that he has 12 all yoked together with this plow. Like, I mean, that's a lot of force for one plow, right? It seems like he's got 12 different yoke because he's with the 12th, so he must have 11 guys working for him. That's a certain amount of wealth, but also of course there's the symbolism of the 12 tribes of Israel. So this seems to be a way of saying he's going to be the prophet for all of Israel, like Elijah was. Maybe we're reading too much into it, but it seems to me when you get this number 12 thrown in there, that's probably what it's indicating. And other than that, I mean, we know his father and mother are still alive. So, and he seems to be with them or associated with them. So he's probably fairly young at this point. And that's about all we know.
And this comes right after Elijah was in a cave and has this little small voice. And so it seems
he goes from Mount Sinai to Elisha's field. That's right where he goes.
Yeah, exactly. So Elijah came from the priests of Baal, and then Jezebel chases him out, or he runs from Jezebel.
Yeah.
And he comes here, he goes has the experience in the cave with the still small voice, and then right after that finds Elisha. So we often read them in segments, but that story is one continuous story.
Yeah. I mean, this guy walks a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, he's all over the place.
Yeah.
But it's one continuous story. He goes in there, he goes to the cave and has the thing, he learns to listen to the still small voice, and now he is taking on an apprentice or a successor or a mentee, right? He's going to bring Elisha. So we hear about Elisha, and then for several more chapters, we don't hear anything about him until later. So this is why it stumps a lot of people. Elisha's brought up here, but if you blink, you're going to miss those 3 verses.
Yeah.
And then
because the next several chapters are stories about other people and other stuff going on, which we can cover another time. But
yeah, exactly. So that's the interesting part with Elijah, and suddenly Elisha is back on the scene when we get there. So let's.
There's one other thing that's maybe worth mentioning here, because it will play a big role in the story of the transition between Elijah and Elisha, and that's how Elijah calls Elisha, because he's out there plowing, right? And Elijah just walks past him. This is so Elijah. Elijah just loves to be just a little bit odd, I think. He just walks past him in the field. He's plowing his field, and he just puts his mantle on him and keeps going, right? Like, here's a man. I'll see you later. It seems like he doesn't even say anything. And you can imagine yourself out plowing, and suddenly someone throws a mantle on you, looking, oh, that's the guy with the girdle, the leather girdle and stuff.
Yeah.
And but this is apparently something that they would all recognize, because Elisha immediately recognizes, oh, he's called me to follow him. And that's why he asks, can I go kiss my father and my mother? And he says, yeah. Elijah's so funny. He's like, oh, whatever, right? I don't have anything to do with you, other than that I just called you to be my successor. But other than that, I've got nothing to do with you. And Elisha goes and sacrifices a yoke of oxen and so on, just as, I guess, a gratitude and so on for this. But there's some kind of symbolism here that everybody recognizes, that the mantle, this hairy mantle, is somehow designates this is kind of this great prophet. And thus, by putting the mantle on Elisha, it's symbolically, he's saying, you will follow me. And this is where this and the story that follows that we'll talk about in a minute is where we get this symbolism of the mantle falling. So we can pick up on that more later when it becomes even more dramatic, but it starts here and is worth noting.
Yeah, that's great because we're going to talk. I'd like to bring up a couple things about the mantle.
Yeah,
Now, in case anybody doesn't know what a mantle is, it's kind of like a long shawl or a
yeah,
cloak. Usually it's kind of worn over the shoulders
yeah,
versus a cloak that might have a hood. It could have had a hood. We don't really know. But that's kind of what we're looking at. It's a long shawl kind of thing that hangs over, and that's
yeah.
what we call a mantle. So,
And
uh,
this one's probably goat hair or something like that, where
or
they call it
camel hair or
hairy.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Elisha's kind of a wild man in general because he goes by this, uh, the leather girded.
Yeah,
He's kind of got a wild appearance, and
yeah,
so I like that he's a unique individual.
yeah. He's
He's not
something
your
else.
he's not your short sleeve white shirt, tie guy.
Yeah,
He's kind of a
he's your mountain man prophet.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Mountain Man is a good idea. He's a mountain man prophet. So yeah, and he's a lot of people know who this guy is. I mean,
yeah,
Elijah's no small fame. He took out a lot of priests of Baal, and anyway, so he drops the mantle on him, and Elisha says, "Okay, he's called me to follow him," and he goes out there. Now, a little bit about the names. Um, let's talk a little bit about what Elijah and Elisha means, and why does he pick someone with the same name or a similar name, or are we talking about these are names that were given afterwards? Like sometimes you pointed out that man of shame, for instance, is one of the names for a successor of. Um, I just lost the name. What's the name? You just talked about an episode previously.
Ishbosheth.
Ishbosheth. That's it.
Yeah,
I couldn't remember the actual name for it.
yeah. And then you've got Mephibosheth later, which is like from the mouth of shame. So yeah, these
So
are
they're probably not real
really
names.
their names. Yeah.
Yeah, not really. They're just like name it. So is Elisha and Elijah their actual names, you think, or are these names that the writers later put on them?
It's a great question, and I don't know how we could tell. They certainly describe them well, and their roles well. So you always have to wrestle with this question. Well, were their parents inspired to name them? I mean, most people, or at least a great number of people, had names that had said something about God in them. So that's not
Right.
uncommon. Right. So you can certainly believe that. And it's quite likely that if you have, and they give someone a religious name and they end up being a religious person, that in some way their name is prophetic, right?
Right.
And you can also get people who are inspired. So were Elijah's parents inspired to name him Elijah, and then his name kind of shaped him a little bit so that he is loudly proclaiming, because his name means my God is Jehovah. And
right.
If there's anything that fit Elijah, and especially in that contest with the priests of Baal, if that seems like that's what he's saying loud and clear. My God is Jehovah. So was it prophetic and it shaped him, or is this a name they gave him later? I don't know. I don't think we can tell with that, or Elisha.
And Elisha is God is salvation.
Yeah, yeah.
So the root word of God in
or
Hebrew
my God is
El.
salvation. Yeah.
Yeah, or my God. Yeah. So El. So it's just interesting that he, I don't know, maybe I just wondered if you had a thought on that, if they were names that were given later, or if we know they were actual names. Not that it really matters too much, but
yeah, it's really possible they're given later. I kind of lean towards not, but I don't have any good reason for that. It's I mean, they describe their mission so perfectly. I don't know. I really don't, but it's an interesting thought.
That's really what I was getting at. And the point of all that question was they really are so descriptive of what these prophets are going to do. The problem that is happening with Israel at this point, especially with the split with the northern kingdom, is the northern kingdom has gone off the rails, and they're all about going after different gods. And Elijah is declaring Jehovah is the God.
Right.
It's not all these other ones. That's the God. And so it's so spot on. You're like, were they born into those names, or were the names just given to them because it fits it so well? But anyway, that's what we have.
And Elisha as well, because I mean, he's going to teach them how they can receive, salvation from Syria, as in not getting destroyed by Syria. He's a key element in that. And then of course, larger salvation as well. So,
right. Perfect. So that's a great setup for who Elisha is. And then let's talk a little bit about the stories. So the stories that happen in between in 20, 21, 22 in First Kings, Elijah's finishing out his ministry. We suspect that Elisha might be there somewhere, but he's not mentioned specifically.
but
But
you would
not
assume
mentioned.
he's there, but you'd never hear about him.
Right.
Yeah.
So he comes, Elisha. Is there's anything we need to cover as far as what goes on? He does some great things. Let's jump ahead here to, I think it's 2 Kings chapter 2, and we're going to talk about the mantle, which you were just mentioning. So let's set up a little bit about what's going on. So Elijah he knows he's going to go. Now, this is an interesting thing. I think there's a lot of prophets might have a sense that their time is short and they need to get things in order. And I've known this with even people that I've known that were very in touch with the Spirit. Yeah. They get things set up so that their transition doesn't leave everybody in a win. But this one's interesting. He keeps saying, it says it like at least 5 times, maybe more than that. Like, I'm going to go pretty soon. I got to do this. And it's mentioned.
And these other people know it as well.
Yeah. And then how do the other people know it, except for if Elijah's telling them? You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, so you've got this group, and Elijah's a different case because he's going to be translated, right? So this is just different altogether than other situations. But you get this group that are called the sons of the prophets. So if you look in say 2 Kings 2, verse 3.
Yeah, verse 3. And the sons of the prophets were.
The sons of the prophets, and this isn't the first time we've heard of this group. Sometimes it's translated children of the prophets. It's the same word, just you sometimes say sons, sometimes children. So we encountered them. For example, Saul was told by Samuel after he was anointed, you're going to encounter these sons of the prophets, and then you'll start to prophesy with them, and he did. So this is a group of people, and there may be several different groups that are inspired. Do they have separate jobs and they just get together sometimes, or are they groups that travel around together? It seems like maybe there's some of each. We don't really know a lot about them, but there are these inspired groups that are together quite often. They seem to be different groups in different places. So maybe these are like, the high priest quorum or something like. I'm just joking because there's not a high priest quorum, but there's something like that, a group that gets together, worships together, and is inspired together. And so I would assume that that's at least part of how they know what's going to happen, is that this is an inspired group. So they say to him, knowest thou that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? And basically says, I know it, quit talking about it.
Yeah, I know. And Elisha says, I know. Don't, hold your peace.
Yeah, well, this is not a subject to bring up with me right now. Get out of here.
I think it's interesting, and I've often wondered, and this is a topic for another time, but it talks about these groups that are out there that seem to be inspired and know things. And I often wonder if they had books, did they write revelations down? Where would those be, and what information would they have to share? It's just something to think about.
Yeah, it is a great question, and this is worth maybe 2 little caveats. I mean, one, I would love it if they had writings and they surfaced one day. We're kind of at the just almost on the cusp of when there's a cultural shift and writing things down becomes more common, which I think is probably why we don't have any writings of Elijah or Elisha. I think they probably didn't write because it just wasn't something you did, right? It's very few people were writing things down. But you get this change within the next like 50 to 70 years, so that it becomes more common all throughout the ancient Near East for not just officials to write down official things that need to be kept track of for bureaucratic reasons, but for people to write down other things. And so that's why you're suddenly just after this going to get Amos and Isaiah and so on, these prophets who do write their words down, or have scribes write their words down like Jeremiah. But that's kind of a new thing. So my guess is they're not writing, but we don't really know for sure. Secondly, it's interesting because we're always looking for a structure that seems familiar to us, an organizational structure. And that's one of the reasons that the Old Testament's a little frustrating for us, because we keep looking for the structure and it just doesn't exist. We want to see a prophet who is the presiding prophet. And we really don't see that. We do see frequently prophets who are more well-known and everybody understands, hey, we should listen to these guys. Elijah and Elisha are certainly some. Jeremiah and Isaiah are going to be some. But even Jeremiah and Isaiah, we know, for example, Micah is prophesying at the same time as Isaiah, and Ezekiel and Lehi and others are prophesying at the same time as Jeremiah. So we don't have this kind of quorum and organizational structure with a hierarchy that we're used to. And you even get prophets who are inspired to go and correct other prophets and things like that. And so there are all sorts of odd things that are just not what we're wanting and what we're looking for. And while it is true that there are some organizational things that are timeless in the gospel, it's probably less than what we think. And it frustrates us that we can't figure out how these groups fit in with each other, because we're very structured and very organized, and necessarily so for an international church.
Sure.
But this is kind of an international church, but I also, in terms of practicality, very, very regional. And so you've got all sorts of people inspired, and they interact with each other. And who knows who's does Elijah have stewardship over these sons of the prophets? I don't know that we can say. I don't know that we can talk about stewardship in that way with this time period. So all we can say is that there are some inspired folks, and they interact with other inspired folks, and that's good.
Interesting. It's not mentioned. I think there's only hear about these guys twice, right? That I know of, and it's only a passing reference.
No, we find them a number of times in the Elisha story, and a bit in the Elijah story. And then we get, like I said, it was in the Samuel and Saul story. So that's enough to cover, a good span of time to suggest. And then you're going to find other groups that seem like they're the same group in Jeremiah's day. So we're probably looking at least a couple hundred years where you've got these groups like this. But we just know so little about them.
Interesting. I was thinking about it appears twice in the Elisha story, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe more, but I'm just thinking of just when it calls them sons of the prophets. But anyway, that's interesting. And if you're following along at home, we're in chapter 2 now. We've a few things happen. Elijah prophesies of Isaiah's death. Don't miscount those or discount those stories. They're good stories also. But we're following in this podcast the transition from Elijah to Elisha, and a little way around, Elijah to Elisha. I said that. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, okay. And the fun thing, or the interesting thing about Elisha now, we don't hear about him for 4 chapters, and then he comes on and he's following Elijah. And Elijah, this in verse 2, it says, Elijah said unto Elisha, tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel. Well, that's kind of is that a command or a request, whatever, but it's coming from the prophet. Elisha said to him, as the Lord liveth and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And so they both went down to Bethel. Okay.
Yeah, well, this happens. He's trying to ditch him, right?
Exactly. And I'm like, what is Elisha up to? But Elijah is up to, and Elisha's like, nope, I'm going to come with you. And so he doesn't seem bothered. They go down.
Now I do have to, let's just pause just for a second. I love to just try and make these things real and kind of think about what they're like. We have zero information about this, but sometimes I stop and think, we've already said Elijah is he's an interesting guy, right? Fantastic prophet. He's a loner. He is absolutely a loner. And sometimes he complains about, there are no one else that follows God. And God says, actually, lots of people, but let's keep going on. And Elijah, he's quirky. Can you imagine being Elisha, who seems to come from, Elijah's the mountain man guy. Elisha's come from somewhat of a wealthy background, right?
Yeah.
And now he's trying to follow Elijah around and communicate with him. And I don't feel like Elijah is like the easiest person to communicate with or to be a roommate with, right? He's a good guy, but my guess is that it took Elisha a while to figure out how to work with Elijah. Like, okay, do I ask a question now? Do I not? Oh, every time he answers me, it's a riddle or something like that, right? It probably, I would have liked to have just seen what that was like as Elisha figured out working with Elijah. And I think we're seeing just this little evidence here where Elijah says, stay here. And he's like, nah, thanks though. So, they figured out how to work with each other.
But it's interesting because, you think, okay, he's disobeying the prophet, but I apparently Elisha knows the difference between Elijah the man and Elijah the prophet given a directive. He says, no, I can do it. I'm coming with you. And this happens 3 times in verse 4, same thing. Elijah said, Elisha, tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho. And the way he answers is not just, nah. He says, and as he said, again, same thing. As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they came to Jericho. So it's like, this guy, I can't get rid of him. Anyway, same thing. And again in verse 6, Elijah said,
and each time the sons of these prophets are saying, yep, you're going to lose him. And I'm like, I know, shut up.
Oh, yeah. They pop up again. The sons of prophets, hey, he's going to die. And Elisha keeps going, shush.
Yeah.
Anyway, then we go to verse 6. This whole cadence of this story is interesting to me. And the lessons to take out of it, I'm not sure, but I think it'll speak to different people different ways. But again, in verse 6, and Elijah said to him, tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord has called me now to Jordan. And he said to him, as the Lord liveth, his soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And so the two went on, and they two went on. So 3 times he tries to get rid of him. And is that a test? Is he saying, leave me, just see what happens? And he's like, nope, the Lord has told me I got to follow you. I'm going to stick to you like glue. And, maybe Elijah's going, yeah, okay. All right, this guy gets it. He gets it. I got to go to Jericho. I'll be back in a minute. I'm going to get some eggs. Nope. I'm sticking with it. So I don't know what the deal is, but it's an interesting story. And the way Elisha answers him, as thy soul liveth and as the Lord liveth, soul liveth, that's an oath kind of thing. That's oath language. Yeah. When you invoke the name of the Lord and you invoke the soul, he's like, there's no way, I'm not doing it. So maybe he knows something that's up and he's not going to miss out on it. And I just think it's an interesting commentary on their relationship. What's going on here? And he sticks with him. And again, we see 3, we see 7, we see 12, occasionally other numbers, but those numbers seem to come up so often, and it seems like the writers are trying to indicate there's something going on. So the thing happens 3 times. He says it 3 times, answers the same way. But he's a dedicated to his mentor. Elisha is to his mentor Elijah, and he's going to stick to him. And we should probably mention also that I don't have the reference in front of me. Where is the Elisha asked for a double portion of his spirit?
It's happening just right where we're at now. It's going to happen right after that when Elijah takes the mantle in verse 8.
Okay, there it is. Okay, so let's read that. So in verse 8, Elijah took up his mantle and wrapped it together, and he smote the waters. Now, when he says wrapped it together, it seems to indicate like he rolls it or he makes something.
Yeah. I kind of picture it being rolled up, but I don't know exactly what that means, but it's something small.
He wrapped it together, but he smote the waters with it. So maybe you think about when you used to snap your brother with a towel, you whip it up like this. I don't know what he's doing there.
I love that. That's what he did. He snapped that.
He snapped his mantle. It's like he does something. He wraps it up so he like twists up like a towel. And he smacks the water, and boom, the waters are divided. So here again, we see Moses's, like you mentioned earlier, a signature miracle. Parting the Red Sea, and then Joshua does it. He parts the Jordan, and now Elijah does it. He with his mantle. He doesn't have a staff. He uses mantle. So, for whatever reason, the mantle is his manifestation. Like Moses had a staff, and he's got a mantle, and for some reason that's how he focuses his energy or whatever. He takes the mantle and he smote the waters, and they divided hither and thither, and they two went over on dry ground. So there's that miracle again. And I just think it's an interesting way. Again, Elijah's a very unique individual, and I see a lot of personality in there, and I don't want to read too much into it. Maybe it's just my comedic mind trying to read stuff, but I just think this guy's an interesting guy to be around.
He is.
And Elisha's kind of a character as well. And so anyway.
He kind of takes on some of the characteristics of his mentor, it seems, a little later when you see him interacting with others.
Yeah, we'll talk about that here in a bit. And it came to pass, this is verse 9 now, and it came to pass when they were gone over, that Elijah said unto Elisha, ask what I shall do for thee before I be taken away from thee. And Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. Let's pause there for a second and talk about that. What does that mean to have a double portion?
It's a great question. And I'm not sure we fully understand it. It would seem to me, so there's no on the face of it answer that makes sense. So we have to read something into it. So it would seem to me that he's saying, however much God was helping you to make you be able to do what you need to do, I need twice as much help.
Okay.
That's kind of how I read it. Like the spirit that's helping you, let a double portion of that be on me. If I'm going to step into your shoes, I need a lot of help is basically what this is saying.
And I read it something like this also about asking for good gifts. Solomon
Good.
asks for wisdom. He doesn't ask for other things. He asks for the wisdom.
Yeah.
And he's given wisdom because he asked for it. And John the Beloved in the New Testament, he at one point, he asked the apostles, "What do you want me to do?" And I want to sit on your right hand, and I want to,
Yeah.
So they ask for good gifts, and I think that's a lesson for us. Let's ask for good gifts. Now, is it Elijah's ability to give him double portion of the Spirit? He's not asking for his own soul, but he's asking for the help of God. Well, Elijah can't specifically do that for him. He can't give him, "I'll give you double my power." That's not Elijah's to give. But
Right.
the lesson I take away from that is ask for good gifts. He's asking for the right thing. His heart's in the right place. He's saying exactly what you said. I'm going to need twice as much power. You've done some great things. I got some big tasks to face. If I'm going to take over your shoes, give me a double portion of Spirit. So I take away from that, let's ask for good gifts. Let's ask for things that will help us. It's not the money and the wealth and all these things. Let's ask for wisdom. Let's ask that we can be, kept in the presence of God. Let's ask for a double portion of Spirit.
Yeah, just the ability to help other people is what all of those things really kind of boil down to.
Yeah, right. Perfect. So I think that's a good commentary on Elisha.
Yeah.
And what he says. And so anyway, so that's what we get some information on Elisha there. And then Elisha gets taken up here. So right there, next thing that happens there. Oh, you have verse 10.
And he gives that key, in verse 10. Right. Go ahead.
Oh, and he said, "Thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou see me when I am taken from thee, it shall be so unto thee. But if not, it shall not be so." So again, we're going back to Elijah's like, I can't do that specifically, but if you see what's going to happen in a minute, then you're in.
Yeah,
that
the
Lord's
God's granting it.
Yeah, exactly. So, so Elijah must know what's going to happen. I don't know how he knows exactly what's going to happen, but he's like, okay, you're going to get it. You'll get that. If you see what's going to happen right now, then you'll know. If not, it's not going to be that. But so Elijah doesn't know how Elisha is going to be blessed.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's interesting. Going on to verse 11. Go ahead. Do you have something on that?
No, keep going.
Okay. And in verse 11, it came to pass they still went on and talked, and behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Now, what a scene is that, right? Yeah. So they come up there, they're walking, they're talking, and this chariot of fire and horses. Man, I'd like to go that way. That'd be great. Rather than dying in a hospital bed somewhere, pick me up in a chariot of fire. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unforgettable image, isn't it?
Well, and I don't know. Who knows what the other side is like? Maybe if you could see people passing out of this world in hospital beds, maybe there's other people. But this is apparently a welcome for Elijah for being a good servant. You've been a good servant. You've done my will. It's a testament to Elisha that the Lord looked out for his prophet.
And it's worth pausing for at least a moment to ask, why is Elijah being taken up rather than dying? Which is he's got to join Moses' not mortal traveling buddy, but from here on out traveling buddy, in being able to come to the Mount of Transfiguration to bestow keys, which he can only do if he's holding, if he has a physical body, and the resurrection hasn't happened yet, so he has to be translated to do that, right? But but at least if he's going to be translated, he's going to be translated in style, right? He's not just going to disappear. He's going. Chariots are kind of the nicest mode of transportation for the day, but he doesn't even get just a normal chariot. This is a chariot of fire. Maybe it's another way. It's just a really light-filled chariot, but. I mean, this is a cool way to go. I'd be happy to travel sometime in a chariot of fire, but it's good stuff.
Yeah, it's fitting for a prophet who was a unique individual. Let's say that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so
Everything Elijah does, he does with style.
so very good. So Elijah went up by the whirlwind into heaven, and when Elisha, saw it, he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof, and he saw him no more. And he took hold of his own clothes and rent them into two pieces. Now, you've talked about this a little bit about the tearing of the clothes
Yeah.
as a sign of mourning.
Yes, this outward expression of what's happening in your heart. So if you're feeling torn up inside, you tear up outside as well.
Right.
But this is where we learn Elisha does see it, right? It's very clear. Not only does it say he saw it, but he describes what he sees. So we know that he saw him go up. So he gets the double portion of the Spirit.
Apparently, yeah. Apparently that's going to be, it will be so to him. So the Lord's going to call us. Now, this is interesting. And we've talked about that mantle and it being the kind of focus of Elijah's power, or whatever symbol. And he also took up the mantle of Elijah. This is verse 13. He took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and went back and stood by the Jordan. Now, so let's talk about taking up the mantle. This starts the whole saying about taking upon the mantle of leadership.
The mantle is falling upon this person and so on.
Right, which is not just in the church and not just in Christianity particularly, but really is known the worldwide. You hear about the mantle of leadership. They talk about presidents who've now taken on the mantle. This is where it comes from, unless I'm wrong. And if you think I'm incorrect, correct me in the comments down below.
It's right. Oh, yeah, someone else.
No, yeah, anybody watching here, correct me in the comments down below. But I looked and looked for other references about this. Is this where we actually get the passing of the mantle? And it does seem to come from this story, is where we get the whole not cliche, but the whole image of taking on the mantle. It comes from Elijah's story. And this is kind of as a side note, just shows you how much impact the Bible really had on the development of language and concepts in the world at large.
Yeah, absolutely true.
It for so many years, the Bible was what was the main text that people read for both religious instruction and also literary instruction. This is what they learned to read. It wasn't, Little Women and Dostoevsky's and, Tale of Two Cities. It was the Bible they read, and this has influenced a lot of sayings and traditions and customs that we have come from the Bible. So this is where we get the passing of the mantle, and now we use it quite often when we talk about the prophets changing and the mantle fell upon them. And it happens in the restoration of the church, when the mantle passes from Joseph to Brigham Young. People talk about the physical appearance and that mantle falling upon them, and this is where it comes from to begin with. So
anyway. I agree, and there's a tremendous principle here as well, that especially in a church where, other than the few leaders we have that are leading the church, the rest of us trade positions all the time. And to recognize that this mantle, another way that we could say this is either keys or being set apart or something along those lines. But it's very real that something passes one from another person. I can remember on my mission, I served as a zone leader, I don't know, for like a year and a half or something like that. But I asked if I could train the last 2 months of my mission. And it's interesting because while I was a zone leader, I always understood what we needed to do in each zone. Okay, we need to do this and this and this to help this zone. And then I was moved to a zone where I was not the zone leader, and you're not even set apart as a zone leader. You're just kind of called, right? But it was still pretty real, because the zone leaders there were some guys who I'd worked with earlier, and they came to me and they said, what do you think we should do for the zone and this thing? And I couldn't think of a thing. And all that time I thought it was because I really understood it. And it became very clear to me, no, that was God helping me, because that was my calling, and it's not my calling now. And I got nothing. You guys are going to have to go learn from the Lord yourselves. Right. Or even now, when I first moved into the ward I'm in now, there's a fantastic man who was bishop, and he was released, and someone else was called as bishop. And then I was called as bishop, and I called that guy who was bishop when I first moved in as my executive secretary. Well, I asked the stake president called him, but
right, yeah, I get it.
And to his I mean, he's such a great guy. A number of times in different councils, as we were doing things, he would say, I understand and have great faith in the keys that the bishop holds. And he wasn't talking about me, right?
Right.
But he understood what it meant for a mantle to pass from one person to another. And he'd say, I understand what's happening for that individual. It used to happen for me. It's not happening for me now. It's happening for him. Let's go with that, right? And
Right.
I think that this is a principle that's worth understanding, because one day, and I won't say whether I hope it's soon or not, but anyway, someone else will have the calling that I'm in, and it will be important for me to understand that the mantle is passing from me to him, and that those keys have passed, and we just support each other, because that's how the church works. We rotate through callings like crazy, and one day you're presiding and the next day someone else is presiding, and that's just how it works.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I've seen stake presidents go to be nursery leaders for a while after, and that's great. That's the way it works in church. Sometimes you have your chance to be a leader, and sometimes you have your chance to lead in another way, or teach. I've been in lots of different leadership roles, and I like them all, and they're great. But I also like just to teach. It's fun just to teach and to be with the youth sometimes. That's great.
And then just believe that for each calling there is a mantle for that calling, and appreciate the mantle that we're wearing at the time, and understand the mantle that other people are wearing.
I think that's great, because I had a bishop when I was in the bishopric. My bishop that I served with for a long time, he one time said to me, I wish people could sit on this side of the desk for a little while.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the end of his statement. He goes, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, like just walk a mile in my shoes. What I mean is, I wish you could see the changes in people and the spirit working in the lives from this side of the desk. And I think that works both. Sometimes I think, you hear people, oh, well, Bishop so-and-so or brother so-and-so or sister whatever is not doing this. And I'm like, man, take some time and spend a bunch of hours a week trying to help people out. And you might want to give them a little bit of grace, because sometimes you don't understand what's going on in the people they're working with life or their life. And a lot of times I think that we could all use a little more humility and a little less judgment in almost everything that we do in the church, and let people grow in their callings, and you grow in your calling, and not try to steady the ark, as it were, So that's great. I mean, it's great to get the feel to have that responsibility to help other people, and the help that comes with it, like the double portion of spirit that Elisha gets and that Elijah had. It passes to him now, and now Elisha has it, and he's going to go use that. And so that's those good lessons. I like that.
And we've got this incident also where he in turn takes that mantle and parts the River Jordan, right?
Oh, that's right. At the end, so same thing. So it's almost becomes like hey, if you're gonna pray to be a prophet, at least you gotta split the waters.
Yeah. And it is remarkably, as you pointed out earlier, it's remarkably like that transition from Moses to Joshua, where you had shoes that were larger than life to fill, and God had a way of letting people know, I'm with this guy every bit as much as I was with any of the others. And Elijah also has become just a prophet writ large in the skies, as it were, and God lets everybody know he's with Elisha the same way he was with Elijah. And that's probably part of why it's good that these sons of the prophets are there to witness it. So it's not just Elijah. There's someone else who from afar sees that this happens, and word can spread that as God was with Elijah, so he is with Elisha. And I'm paraphrasing from that's what God said to Joshua, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. But you see, I think there's an intentional parallel here, and it's important for Elisha that this happens.
I think that's right. And I don't think that every prophet needs to have a miracle or split the Red Sea or do something like that, or have a rod that calls fire. I don't think it's a kid, but for this people at this time, there does seem to be a stamp of approval, because remember Israel is split now. They got the northern kingdom, southern kingdom, and there are other people that are prophetic out there, but who is speaking for the Lord? And I think at this particular time, the Lord is okay with a few symbols, just like when Joseph Smith was killed and then Brigham Young took over. The people were not sure. There was Sidney Rigdon, there was Brigham Young, there was all these people in the wagons, and who do we follow? And the Lord is okay with giving a sign once in a while, especially this people who are very physical sign oriented. They need to have something to keep them in the right track. And I think this is a great way. So they just went across the river, and Elijah's taken up, and now Elisha's coming back across the river, and he does the same thing. He takes the mantle, boom, puts it on, across the, and they come back and they're like, oh, well, all right, there's the new prophet. There's the mantle has fallen upon him, literally and figuratively. So.
Yep. And I think, it's not even just sometimes God is okay with signs, especially for these people who are very symbol oriented. Very, very frequently, God is more than happy to give a kind of a sign. He just works with us in the way that we need to be worked with. So.
Right. Exactly. I think that's great. Well, let's there's a few more things that I'd like to talk about Elisha that are in the reading that we're going to cover for this week. But let's end this here with so that our audience who's listening, they don't have to listen to 2 hours or whatever. They can listen to this in a chunk and maybe the next one in a chunk if they have some time. And we'll talk a little bit more about Elisha and about some of the miracles that he does when he starts off his ministry. But we'll leave it there with the transition from Elijah to Elisha. Elisha's now the prophet. He has the mantle. He's doing the miracles, and he starts in right away. And then next podcast, we'll spend a little bit of time on the first couple of miracles that Elisha does and what those mean.
Sounds great.
All right.
So much good stuff. We can't talk about it at all.
I know, we gotta break it up. The whole Testament in general there's so much detail and so much interesting stories. Like, you just get the flavor of what Elijah is like. This mountain man, a little bit crazy, not crazy like mentally crazy, but just a little. He's very unique individual, and we miss that. We're speeding through so fast, and we're catching the principles. All great, but hopefully this podcast helps enlighten a few things and gives a little bit of reality to it. That's what the scriptures are real. We're trying to give a little bit of reality to the scriptures and when they become real. And when I see the real people come out of the stories, that's when it becomes real to me, because I'm actually a professional comedian, if people haven't heard that before. And I see things in a little bit different light. And I always, what's the funny part? What's the humorous part? What's the entertaining part about this? And not to make light of these things. And if you think I'm too silly, leave that down in the comments below too. Lamar is too silly. But
if they think you're too silly, I'm really worried about myself.
Well, I think that's why we get along, is because in your comments and stuff, I find a lot of good, fun stuff. But we're trying to make this real to us. We're relating these people. They aren't just stories. They were real people that lived. They had real quirks, and they also had real spiritual things that they shared with the world. And I think that's what we're trying to get out of this.
Amen.
All right. Well, join us again on the next one, and we'll sign off for this one. Thanks again for joining us on The Scriptures Are Real. Again, I'm Lamar, and this is Kerry, and we'll see you next time.